Hi there, my name's Ischa Ropert and welcome to The Higher Life, where I take concepts considered esoteric, spiritual, new age and psychological and unpack how you can apply the wisdom of these to live in a truly empowered way. And today's episode is pivotal to our relationship with personal power. I want to talk about free will. And it's such an interesting topic, and I think it really brings home, at least it does in my life, about how useful the language that we give or how we conceptualize this inner resourcefulness we have as human beings to really transcend the limitations of our psychology and to own our personal power or agency in a way that it can contribute to this natural unfolding that's happening out in humanity. Now you may ask, what is this unfolding? I mean, it really looks like chaos out there. It is a scary time to be alive. But I imagine for all of humanity over the many generations that we have been in existence, this fear of chaos, of disorder, of the conflict, of the violence, that it's never going to end has been prevalent. However, I believe that we're actually entering into a time of massive transformation, and that humanity is starting to understand that it has within it, in its own intelligence, this capacity to live in a very peaceful, prosperous and innovative way. And it really does come down to free will. Often when we think about free will, we think it's this power that we have to construct our lives in the way that we see fit. Now, unfortunately for humanity, we have this blind spot that the life that we want to construct using this version of free will is often one that has been kind of programmed into us and has very little to do with how universal intelligence works. It takes us away from our natural way of being in the world. And this has created a whole lot of problems, not only for humanity, but for all of life forms, all other life forms, for animals, for our natural environment. We can see how this disalignment with what's true is really creating an unhealthy chaos. So if free will is not this, what is it? Now, I always like to bring this back to my intention through this education, which is to help individuals like yourself to really live in a more empowered way. So we want to talk about it in the context of personal empowerment. And free will really is your personal power. However, let's reframe it in a way that will allow you to engage with free will in a much more fluid and, I believe, insightful way. Let's think about it as the willingness that we all have programmed within us as a species to be free or to live free from the conditioning that we are born into. So in a way, we all have a sense of this free will. We know it in one way or another. It's kind of this impulse or this urge that we have to move beyond what we know, to live outside the rules and the doctrines that may have programmed us in our early years. Humans have this natural desire to be free. We go traveling, we seek out these nomad style lives because we believe that it's helping us to live more freely. However, in the work that I've been doing over the last 20 years in personal transformation, what I've come to understand is what we're really seeking is emotional freedom. We want to be free to experience the full spectrum of our emotions. And if we're able to do this, we're somehow able to live in the natural way of reality in a much more comfortable and, I believe, inspiring way. So the work that you do in personal transformation is essentially about initially claiming back your authentic self, that is, becoming aware that there is a self that operates through you that is not entirely authentic. However, it's a very natural self, it's an ego self, it's one that you were born into because you were born into a family and cultural legacy. And from very early on, you have been educated on how to uphold that system. However, as you look out into humanity, you can see that there is a great unfolding occurring, which has really been activated by many, many humans challenging this conditioning in their own personal lives and starting to seek out alternative ways of being. And that's naturally brought the more curious of us into an inquiry of, why do I behave in the way that I do? What is the source of this conditioning and this way of being in the world that really just doesn't feel authentic to me? And of course, now we have generations of humans who have really brought forward new insights around what I believe is intergenerational trauma, family systems, karmic inheritance, all these different ways of looking at the same process, which is this capacity for us to live free from conditioning has been very hindered or limited by the intensity of the conditioning that we're born into. So it's a kind of strange paradox that you can't even be aware of the fact that you have this really authentic free will if you weren't born into conditioning in the first place. So if we keep it simple and we think free will is really the freedom or the willingness to be free from our conditioning, then we can really sense that desire within us. I think that if all of us would spend a little bit of time in reflection and just feeling into the impulses that move through our psychology, that impulse will eventually become evident to you. And if you're a fairly self-aware person who really believes that it's a right use of your energy to seek out this personal liberation, you then may start to cultivate your capacity to live free from conditioning. And that's really what the Higher Life Academy is dedicated to. It's supporting you to cultivate free will as a superpower so that you can actually be transformed through this process of seeking out your authentic self. However, what usually happens when you start to seek in this way is you come up against barriers to feeling at ease in yourself. And they're usually emotional or energetic in nature. And that is because in those early years when this conditioning process was happening, there was an impact on your psyche during that time. There was a kind of trauma that was imprinted into your system, or you were born into a system that already had this trauma active and alive in it. And it's very physical. It moves through your body in an energetic way. It's very emotional. So it can really pull you down and hold you back from continuing on in this process of self-liberation. Because essentially what you're doing is liberating the authentic self that is at the moment trapped under all those layers of conditioning. And it is free will that is actually motivating your desire to be free. It's that energy, that resilience, that capacity to stay on course, even when it feels hard. I mean, I've had so many times in my process where it's just felt meaningless. I don't really know why I'm focused so intently on this process of seeking freedom. Why don't I just go out there and live a relatively happy and comfortable middle-class lifestyle? I know that I could. I currently live in Singapore. I'm very blessed to have 2 healthy children. My husband really helps support me to do this work because he's working hard in the real world, as people put it. So it's not an easy pathway to be on, to really dedicate your life to seeking a certain truthfulness in the way that you interact with yourself and with others. And now I've spoken to this many times, but what was the catalyst for my decision was, really wanting to honor my mother role, essentially, but also my role as the feminine presence in my family, and really bringing this feminine wisdom into how my family operates and evolves through my time here on earth. So it's such an interesting paradox, really, to take on a role as a modern Western educated woman that I was certainly educated to believe wasn't very valuable, to really dedicate yourself to a mother role or to any of the feminine roles, wife, sister, daughter, those were perceived as a sort of limited way of being in the world and holding me back from living my real potential, which was somehow academic or intellectual or financially motivated. This idea that I could be someone. And it's a really difficult inner conflict to grapple with, I think, at times as a human being that is naturally creative, resourceful, whole. You want to express out into the world, this beautiful experience of being human and you want it to be received. But at the same time, there's something unhealthy about that. And we see that reflected out in the world with people clamoring constantly to be seen and to be received through their creative expression or through their intellectual expression. So how does the work differ here? This is really about an educational pathway. However, this pathway is a lived experience for me. I'm bringing this forward because I've gone through it myself. I've been contemplating my relationship with free will for probably decades in some sort of way. It's a theme that I have worked with many people as a life coach. How much control do we really have? Are we really the manifestors that we are led to believe in the New Age world? I somehow doubt it. I really feel that if we are truly aligned with the idea that there is a higher intelligence, and there really is, that's logical, right? Humans were not the first life form to be here. There was life that preceded the presence of humanity, and we are an extension of that life form. So we were not the first and therefore not the source. I believe there's a certain logic that we can all hold as true around the fact that there is definitely an intelligence that is moving through us. And it is highly perceptive. It has its own agenda. And when we return into the folding, the unfolding, and we really align our free will, that is our capacity to seek freedom, this tenacity that we have, if that becomes, again, I guess, reconciled with this larger unfolding, this universal intelligence, we will come to know what our true purpose is. I think the human mind really isn't capable of envisioning that. So what I want to offer here through this education is really tiny steps in the right direction. And I believe reframing our relationship to free will, spending some time deconstructing what does that mean? Because, I've also seen rhetoric out there that we don't have free will, that everything that we do is a result of the patterns that make us who we are. And of course it's true and not true. Essentially, a human being is a unique combination of patterns, archetypal patterns, karmic patterns, ancestral patterns, natural patterns. Of course, the more we understand how those patterns move through us, the more we may realize that we have very limited control and capacity to change the outcome or the destiny of our lives. However, when we understand that a certain amount of those patterns are simply inherited, we start to become aware of this other core pattern that's moving through us that is very liberated, and it wants to keep liberating and evolving and expanding on itself. And that is where the true essence of free will is or lives. It is a power, our personal power, our capacity to have agency in this unfolding reality. But that agency is motivated by a spiritual desire for emotional, psychological, and psychic liberation from any forces that somehow corrupt our true nature. Wow, that was a mouthful. So how can I put that simply? If you really want to take the wisdom of this reframing of free will and apply it out there in your everyday life, just hold that inquiry. In what ways do I seek to be more free as a unique human being who is part of this larger, beautiful relationship system called humanity? Now, for me, it's really this desire to keep expressing and learning and evolving through these internal contemplations that I'm holding as I go about my very ordinary, very mundane daily life, as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister, as a wife, really embracing and engaging all these relationships that I'm having with these people in my life that I really care for and who care for me. And I'm constantly having to grow and evolve out of my conditioning in order to keep meeting these relationships in a higher state of intimacy, authenticity, and truth. And I'm motivated to do that because I want that for my children. I see it as the offering that I can bring through that parent-child relationship. And of course, in my partnership with my husband, we really have perhaps an unspoken contract, but sometimes an even spoken contract that we want to hold the space for our children to be nourished, to be nurtured, to be provided for, but also to have this playground in which they can really investigate, explore, and celebrate their uniqueness. And they won't be able to do that if the adults in their life, myself, my husband included, are not able to honor that within our own evolution. So there is so much going on in a daily experience of being human. You don't need to be going out there and doing big stuff on an external stage. These acts of owning your personal power, cultivating this agency so that it can reconcile with this spiritual intention to help you live as a truly empowered, awake, and enlightened human being, well, that's already a massive task. But it will enrich you, it will enliven you, it will expand what you understand being human is, and it will bring a vitality and a tenacity to your relationship life that will really bring the intimacy, I believe, that most human beings are seeking. So in a way, it is this free will that drives us as single human beings. We should not deny it. We should not limit it to being in service of manifesting some sort of lifestyle that we think is more credible than the lifestyle or the life we were born into. I'm a big advocate. Claim back, living, and give up lifestyle. It's really a false mirage way of being in the world. You can go out there and create these awesome lifestyles and you can put it all over Instagram, but you essentially can be still feeling disengaged, disconnected, and lost. It's not the solution. We all need to step back and understand there's a much simpler route to being truly at ease and well in the world, and that is simply learning how to live well. So if you found this interesting, if you're thinking about walking the path of personal transformation, absolutely check out more of the free lessons that I have available here at Higher Life TV. Head over to a podcast I've been working on over the last, 2 months, The Pearl Effect, where I really walk you through what personal transformation is and how it can facilitate this pearl-like state that we all desire. Or head over to the Higher Life Academy. I actually have a series of masterclasses that can help you go through your own personal transformation on your own terms. So until next time, take care and love life.